The Hilton name is on more than 8,000 hotels in 138 countries on almost every skyline you can picture. There is a Hilton at the airport you flew out of, and a Hilton on the beach you saved for years to see. And the family whose name hangs over every one of those doors owns none of it. Not one of those 8,000 hotels belongs to the Hiltons. Not the buildings, not the company, not even the brand on the sign. That was the situation in 2024. The unraveling started back in 1979 in a lawyer's office in Los Angeles with a single sheet of paper. When Conrad Hilton died that January, he was worth more than $200 million. He left his own family less than 1% of it, and the will spelled out the details. His two surviving sons split $500,000. His daughter got $100,000. Each grandchild got $15,000. Everything else, more than 99% of one of the biggest fortunes in America, went somewhere none of them could follow. You have slept in a Hilton, most likely. Maybe it was a wedding, or a work trip, or the one nice vacation you took the whole family on. For a lot of people watching this, one night under that name is as close to that world as you ever get. So here is the strange comfort in this story. The people whose name is on the building did not get to keep it either. This is the fortune you were never going to inherit. And it turns out the Hiltons were not going to inherit it either. The one difference is that in their case, it was done on purpose. That is the part that makes this worth the next half hour. Because this is not a story about a family that blew a fortune. Nobody here gambled it away at the tables or drank it into the ground. The money did not vanish. It was signed away on purpose by the two men who built it in two separate acts 40 years apart. Once you see how they did it, you understand something almost nobody is taught about how the largest fortunes on earth stay intact. So, how does a man build the biggest hotel empire in the world and hand his own children almost nothing? Hold on to that question. The full answer does not arrive until the end, and it is not what you think. The foundation. Conrad Hilton, set up in 1944, is the whole key to this story. And at the time, it looked like nothing. A rich man starting a charity. Plenty of rich men did it. This one decision seemed small when he made it. It was not. That charity would one day take the entire fortune away from his own bloodline, and Conrad built it with his own hands, years before anyone in the family understood what it was for. To see how we got here, you have to meet the man himself, because the will made perfect sense to him. Conrad Hilton was born on Christmas Day, 1887, in a dusty New Mexico territory town called San Antonio, before New Mexico was even a state. His father ran a general store. Young Conrad clerked the counter, hauled freight, and rented out spare rooms in the family's own adobe house to travelers coming through on the railroad for $2.50 a night, meals included. There it is, the whole business model of his entire life in miniature before he turned 20. Give a tired traveler a clean bed and treat them like a guest. His first real hotel came in 1919 in Cisco, Texas, in the middle of an oil boom. It was a rundown place called the Mobley, where men were sleeping in shifts because there were not enough beds to go around. Conrad had come to Texas to buy a bank. He bought the hotel instead because the hotel was printing money and the bank deal had fallen through. From that one building, he built an empire, one property at a time. He rode the boom of the 1920s straight up. Then the crash came. People forget how close Conrad Hilton came to losing all of it in the Great Depression. When the economy fell off a cliff, hotels emptied out, and a business built on travelers is a business with no customers when nobody can afford to travel. He went millions into debt. Stories from those years have him borrowing pocket money from a hotel bellman just to get by. His creditors, for a stretch, owned him, and he clawed his way back, one property at a time, and came out the far side hungrier and more careful than the man who went in. That near death in the 1930s shaped the rest of his life, and it shaped how he thought about money and about the people who would one day inherit it. By the 1940s and 50s, Hilton was buying the trophies. He picked up the Stevens Hotel in Chicago, at the time the largest hotel in the world. He took over the Palmer House. 1949 brought him the prize he had wanted for decades, the Waldorf Astoria in New York, a hotel he had dreamed about as a young man, carrying a photograph of it folded in his wallet for years before he ever owned it. He planted the flag overseas and put the name on skylines outside the United States. By the time he was finished, Hilton was the largest hotel company on the planet, and Conrad Hilton was a household name, a face on magazine covers, a walking symbol of the whole American idea that a store clerk from nowhere could build the world. He wrote it all down in a memoir he titled, "Be My Guest," 3 words that doubled as the closest thing he had to a creed. And he became something rarer than rich. He turned into the self-made man the whole country wanted to believe in, proof that the ladder went all the way up. At the peak, his hotels ran on 6 continents, an American brand planted in cities that had never seen one. He opened the first grand American hotel in post-war Europe and spoke about it as a kind of weapon, a slice of American comfort meant to win hearts in the Cold War. That was the scale of the thing Conrad Hilton built. That was what he decided his own children should not inherit. And the entire time, he kept rewriting his will. Over and over. He redrafted it again and again across his life. And there is a pattern in those rewrites that tells you everything. With almost every new version, the share going to his family shrank, and the share going to the foundation grew. The man had not forgotten to provide for his children. He spent decades, on purpose, arranging to not provide for them, because Conrad believed something about inherited money that most wealthy families spend enormous effort pretending is not true. He believed that handing a fortune to your children does not protect them. It ruins them. He had watched other rich families rot from the inside, the heirs with no fight left in them because everything got handed over. He wrote his conviction into the will itself, not as a footnote, but almost as a sermon, page after page, about charity being the highest duty a person has, about wealth being something you owe to the suffering of the world rather than to your own bloodline. Conrad had given the foundation one job from the day he founded it, to relieve the suffering of the distressed and the destitute wherever it found them, with no line drawn for religion or color or country. That was the mission he cared about. The last name was not part of it. When he died in January of 1979, at 91 years old, the document that came out of that lawyer's office was no accident and no oversight. It was the most deliberate thing the man ever wrote, the end point of a lifetime of rewrites all pushing in the same direction. The numbers in it are worth saying slow, because these are the kind of figures that make accountants cry. The estate was valued at more than $200 million. That same charity he had founded 35 years earlier, the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, took better than 99% of it. Everything set aside for the two sons, the daughter, the grandchildren, and a handful of other people added up to less than $1.75 million. Put those two figures side by side and let them sit there, the family and everyone else, under 1%, the foundation, all the rest. A man worth $200 million left each of his grandchildren $15,000, which even in 1979 was about the price of a car, and handed the other $200 million to a charity. Do the math on what that generation walked away from. Split the honest way among a handful of children and their kids. A fortune that size could have set up every Hilton grandchild for life. Tens of millions of dollars apiece. The kind of money that never has to work again. Instead, each of them got the price of a used car, and the foundation got a skyline. Picture being one of those children. You grew up a Hilton. Your father built the most famous hotel company on the planet. Your family name burning on the sign in every major city on earth. Then the day the will is read, you learn that the old man left you a rounding error and gave the empire to a foundation. There is a reason this next chapter became one of the longest inheritance fights in American history. One of those sons was never going to accept it. His name was Barron Hilton, and he had spent his whole life inside the company. He had built the carte blanche credit card into a real business. On the side, he had been one of the founding owners of a professional football team, back when the American Football League was just starting up. He bought into the Los Angeles Chargers for a stake of about $25,000, then later sold out for millions to focus on the hotels. Barron was no bystander heir living off an allowance. Barron had run the business at his father's side for years. So when the will handed the whole thing to charity, he went looking for the one crack in it, and he found it. Here is the crack, and it matters, so stay with me for a second. Conrad's will did not just drop a pile of cash on the foundation. The foundation's inheritance was almost all stock, about 13.5 million shares of Hilton Hotels. Buried inside the will was a provision that handed Barron an option. He had the right to buy a large block of those Hilton shares out of the estate. On paper, it read as a way to keep the family's hand on the wheel of the company, so that no charity board would end up running the hotel empire Conrad built. In practice, Barron used that option to try to buy his way back into control of the company his own father had just given away. And that is where the war started. The moment Barron moved to exercise the option, he was standing between the foundation and its money. The charity wanted those shares. They were the whole endowment, the thing the will had promised it. Its lawyers were not about to watch a slice of the biggest gift in the foundation's history get bought out from under them by the founder's own son. The Internal Revenue Service was circling the estate at the same time, fighting over the taxes owed on a fortune this size, a bill that ran into the hundreds of millions. So you had a three-way brawl. Barron on one side wanting control, the foundation on another wanting its inheritance, the government wanting its cut of all of it. And here is the part that still does not quite make sense to people. The son of the man who gave everything to charity spent years in court trying to pull a chunk of it right back out. Fights like this one usually get settled in a year or two because nobody wants to burn a fortune on legal bills. This one did not settle. The estate tax bill alone became its own war with the government, a dispute over how a gift this large should be taxed, and it dragged the whole thing out even longer. For a while, everything went quiet on the surface, the way giant lawsuits do, while the lawyers grind through motions for years. That calm did not last. The fight ran for the better part of a decade, climbing up through the California courts, and in 1988, an appeals court handed Barron the win. It upheld his right to exercise that option. If you had been Barron, holding an option to buy back a piece of the empire your own father tried to sign away to charity, would you have used it? Hold that thought, because his real answer to that question does not come for another 20 years. When the settlement was signed and the dust cleared, that block of Hilton stock got carved into 3 pieces. Barron himself walked away with about 4 million shares. Another 3.5 million shares went straight to the foundation, and about 6 million shares went into a special trust, what the lawyers call a charitable remainder unitrust, an arrangement where Barron would collect the income from the shares during his lifetime, while the shares themselves were promised to land with the foundation in the end. When the paperwork was done, Barron controlled the voting power of about 34% of Hilton Hotels. He had done it. The son had fought the dead father's will and clawed back a real piece of the empire, enough to run the company as his own. In a normal dynasty story, this is the spot where it would end. The heir wins, the family keeps its stake, the name stays with the blood. Had Barron stopped here, this would be a very different video. Stop here. He did not. And what he did next is the whole reason the family kept none of it instead of some of it. For the next 20 years, Barron ran Hilton and grew it. He took the company he had fought so hard to win and expanded it into a global giant. Thousands of hotels, resorts, a big Las Vegas casino business, a brand on every continent, a machine throwing off cash. Under him, Hilton went public, spun the gaming and casino side into its own separate company, and pushed the international footprint his father had planted deeper into new markets. A founder's creation turned into a modern corporation, and Barron sat on top of it. By any normal measure, the son had not just held the line, he had won, and won big. Then, in 2007, Barron Hilton did 2 things in a single year that erased the family from the empire for good. The first was the sale. 2007 sat near the very top of a private equity boom, the moment when the buyout firms were paying record prices for trophy companies, and Hilton was as trophy as they came. Barron and the company board sold Hilton Hotels to the private equity giant Blackstone. The deal valued the company at around $26 billion, at $47.50 a share, a rich premium over where the stock had been trading. In one transaction, the hotel empire that Conrad Hilton had spent 60 years building and that Barron had spent a decade in court to control, stopped being a Hilton company at all. It became an asset in a Wall Street portfolio, run out of a Manhattan office tower by people named Blackstone, not Hilton. The family name stayed up on the buildings because the name itself was worth money. The ownership walked out the door. Look at what that split really means. The most valuable thing the family still had was never the buildings. It was the word on the buildings. In the deal, The hotels and the business changed hands, while the name stayed behind as a brand to be licensed and hung over doors the family would never again walk through as owners. Blackstone would run it, polish it, and a few years later float it back onto the public markets at a large profit. The Hiltons watched every bit of that from the outside, same as anyone reading the business page. If you are wondering how a family lets go of the one thing that made them who they were, so was much of the business press at the time. But the sale was not even the strange part. The strange part came at Christmas. So think about where we stand. Barron Hilton is now in his late 70s. He has fought his own father's will for 10 years, and he won. He has run the empire for 2 decades. Now he has just sold it in one of the largest hotel deals in history, at the top of the market. Whatever you make of the man, this was someone who spent his whole life keeping the family's grip on the fortune. And what he did next made everything before it look like a warm-up. So, Barron had just sold the empire and won every fight he ever picked. His next move made all of that look tame. On Christmas Day, 2007, Barron Hilton announced that he would leave about 97% of his own fortune, an estate that Bloomberg valued at around $2.3 billion, to the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. The same foundation, the one he had spent a decade in court fighting, that very one his father had used to cut the family out in the first place. Barron looked at the exact instrument that had disinherited his own generation, and he pointed it straight at his children and grandchildren. Read that again, because it is the hinge of the whole story. The man who sued to escape his father's will spent the end of his own life recreating it on purpose and aiming it at his own heirs. He pledged an immediate $1.2 billion drawn from the proceeds of the Hilton sale and another investment into a trust bound for the foundation. The rest would follow when he died. His gift was set to about double the foundation, lifting its endowment from around $2.9 billion toward more than $6 billion. He would become the single largest donor in its history. His timing was of a piece with the age, too. He was out ahead of a wave of American billionaires who would soon start promising their fortunes away rather than handing them to their kids. A few years later, that wave had a name, the Giving Pledge, and Barron put his signature on it. He framed the decision in his father's own language, the belief that a fortune does more good aimed at the problems of the world than parked in a family account. Whether that was true conviction or the old man winning the argument from beyond the grave at last, the result came out the same. And his own family, the grandchildren who carried the Hilton name into a new century, would divide what was left, the last 3%. That last 3% is where the public image of this family falls apart. For years, the world looked at a certain Hilton granddaughter and saw a billion-dollar heiress, the very picture of inherited money, someone who would one day sit atop the whole hotel fortune. That was the story the public knew. Behind the scenes, the arithmetic told a different story. Grandpa had pledged 97% to charity. The famous heiress and the rest of that generation were not splitting a hotel empire. They were splitting the leftovers of the leftovers, a small slice divided among about 24 relatives. The billion-dollar heiress image was a costume. The real inheritance had been signed over to a charity years before anyone bought the tabloids. Barron Hilton died in September of 2019 at 91 years old, the same age his father had been at his own death. And like his father, he kept his promise. The overwhelming majority of everything he owned went to the foundation, just as he had said it would. 2 generations of Hilton men, the founder and his son, had now looked at their own families and made the identical choice. Not you, the foundation. So, we come back to the question I asked you to hold at the start. Why? Why would 2 men build an empire this size and root it away from their own blood, not once but twice? The easy answer is spite, or some family feud, and there is friction in this story for certain. But spite is not the real reason, and if you stop there, you miss the whole lesson. The real reason is a belief, and it is one of the oldest arguments about money there is. Conrad Hilton believed, down in his bones, that a great fortune dropped on the next generation does not bless them. It rots them. He had watched it happen to other rich families, the heirs with no purpose and no drive, because everything got handed to them. He decided the most loving thing he could do, and the most useful thing his money could do, was go to work on the suffering of strangers instead of sitting in a trust fund with his last name stamped across it. Barron, the son who fought that idea for a decade, seems to have arrived at the very same conclusion by the end of his own life. He had the money, he had the name, and he chose the foundation anyway. There is a name for this idea, and it runs older than Hilton. Back in 1889, the steel baron Andrew Carnegie wrote an essay the whole Gilded Age argued over, called The Gospel of Wealth. One line from it became famous. The man who dies rich, he wrote, dies disgraced. Carnegie meant that a rich man's real job is to give the fortune away in his own lifetime, to libraries and schools and the public good, rather than dumping it on his heirs and calling that love. Then he went and did what he preached, giving away the bulk of a steel fortune to build libraries across the country. Conrad Hilton was born into the world Carnegie was preaching to, and he built his whole will around the same conviction. The Hiltons are not the exception to how the old fortunes think. They are one of the purest examples of it. Look at the biggest names of that whole era, and you see the same move over and over. Rockefeller. Money built a foundation that still gives today. Ford money did the same. Carnegie's libraries are still standing in towns across the country, more than a century after the man who paid for them died. The richest industrialists in American history, the ones whose fortunes outlasted them, did not hand the pile to their children and hope for the best. They built machines to give the money away, and they aimed those machines at the public instead of the bloodline. Conrad Hilton watched all of it happen around him, and he copied the playbook down to the last page. Which brings us to the misconception this whole video exists to correct. People say the Hiltons lost their fortune. They did not lose it. Nobody misplaced $200 million. Nobody drank it, or gambled it, or got swindled out of it. People say the family blew it, squandered it, fell apart in a heap. None of that happened either. There was no drunk grandson who lost it at the track, no forged signature, no crooked partner who ran off with the accounts. The story people love to tell about rich families, the one where the third generation ruins everything the first one built, does not fit this family at all. People say the Hiltons still own Hilton, that somewhere behind a curtain, the family is still collecting on all 8,000 hotels. They are not. The company was sold to Blackstone in 2007, taken public again a few years later, and today it trades on the New York Stock Exchange as a company held by the public, with no controlling Hilton stake at all. The family does not own it. They gave it away. Every part of the popular story about this family losing its money is wrong in the same direction. They did not lose it. They released it. That is the difference between this dynasty and almost every other one. Most of these stories are collapses. A founder builds something, and 3 generations later a weak heir, or a bad marriage, or a stupid feud burns it to the ground, and the money is just gone, scattered, wasted. This one is no collapse. Nobody failed here. The Hilton fortune was taken apart by the same people who built it step by step with lawyers on purpose. Of all the dynasties on this channel, this is the one where the fall was the plan. So, who won in the end? Follow the money all the way down, and there is a clear answer, and it is not a person. The winner is the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. Today, it holds around $7.4 billion in assets, which makes it one of the largest private foundations in the United States. It has given away more than $3.6 billion over its life, and it grants out on the order of $300 million every year. That money funds work you would never connect to a hotel chain. Clean water in the developing world, housing for people coming out of homelessness, support for foster kids aging out of the system with nowhere to go, disaster relief, programs for the Catholic sisters who run hospitals and schools in the poorest corners of the globe. Put it in plain terms, that charity gives away more money in a single year than most of the families' homes on this channel ever managed to hold on to across a whole century. And it has been doing it for decades, and it will keep doing it long after everyone alive today is gone. 80 years after Conrad Hilton set up that quiet little charity in 1944, the thing he built with it is still running, still growing, still writing checks. The name is on the hotels, the money is at the foundation, and the foundation is where both men aimed it from the very start. Here is the lesson, and it is a real one, for anyone who never had a fortune to hand down in the first place. We tell ourselves the rich lose their money because their kids are spoiled and careless. Sometimes that is true. But the biggest, most durable fortunes in this country did not survive by getting passed hand to hand from father to son. They survived by getting pulled out of the family and locked inside something the next generation could not touch, could not sell, could not fight over, and could not waste. A foundation, a trust, some structure with a mission where a bloodline used to be. Conrad Hilton figured that out and spent 35 years and a lifetime of rewrites building it. His son fought that truth for 10 years in court, won, and then surrendered to it anyway. The Hiltons ended up with the one thing their founder wanted them to have. Not the hotels, not the $200 million, and not the $26 billion company either. Just a name. The heirs got the name, and the money went to work. 8,000 hotels carry the word Hilton tonight in 138 countries, and the family that gave the world that name will not collect a single dollar from any one of them. That was never the ruin at the heart of this story. That was the design. They kept the name. The money went to work. And that is the part worth taking with you, whatever your last name is and whatever sits in your bank account. The fortunes that vanish are the ones left lying around for the next person to grab and burn. The fortunes that last are the ones locked behind a purpose that outlives the people who made them. Conrad Hilton understood that better than almost anyone who ever got rich in this country, and he proved it with the one argument nobody can talk their way around. The money is still here. His own family just cannot touch a dollar of it. If you want to see the exact opposite choice, a family that fought like animals to keep every dollar inside the bloodline and watched it destroy them anyway, the story on your screen right now is where to go next.